This past Tuesday, with temperatures plummeting and the wind whipping, about 8 of us met in Inwood Hill Park for a prayer walk. Now, I had honestly prepared myself for the likelihood that the only prayer I would be able to utter would be, "God, warm me up." But after the hour that I spent with Benz and Cindy, Kay, Cheryl, Alicia, Katie, and Brent, slowly walking and meditating in silence along our route, I got so much more. Our journey through the park, it was split up into 5 stints, each one offering a new prompt for our contemplation. In between, we broke silence to sing. We reflected on freedom this whole time. As we began, Katie encouraged us to walk and prayerfully consider first what constrains or binds us. Next, we thought about what might help loosen us from those bindings. From there, we thought about what freedom actually means to us, what it is. And finally, we considered what freedom requires of us. In between each of these, we chanted, "We who long for freedom come, we who long for freedom come, we who long for freedom, we who long for freedom, we who long for freedom come." And it does say something that 8 of us showed up, don't you think? I mean, Kay and I really did believe we might be by ourselves, or at least maybe with Alicia, who had pledged to be there. But it says something that 8 of us came together and went into the wilderness, in spite of the bitter cold, in spite of competing priorities, and in spite of so much else. We who long for freedom, we came. Our scripture passage today speaks to this need in all of us to make a home in freedom land. From the wilderness, a prophet perceived a way. From loss, a prophet preached of what was not. From isolation and separation, a prophet proclaimed return. And from dislocation, a prophet pointed the exiles to a lasting home in freedom. 2nd Isaiah, as scholars refer to the prophet, wrote in the 6th century BCE, at a time of shifting politics and changing national powers. The Israelites, who Babylon had dispersed by force upon the fall of Judah and Jerusalem, they were invited by decree to return. Oh, happy day, right? Except it wasn't so simple. Think with me about how those displaced Israelites might have felt, even after they were told that they could go back. Persia's success in overthrowing Babylon couldn't undo the trauma that they had experienced. The ability to go back didn't mean that they were returning home, because the home they knew would never be the same, nor would they. A return didn't immediately restore their trust in God either. This was a God who they had believed would protect them, the chosen ones. And yet they were expelled from their homes and had lost proximity to their people, their community. That breach in trust just doesn't come back automatically. To intensify what must have been confusing and disorienting, the surrounding discourse of the time was equally challenging and anything but comforting to these people who had to pick up everything and move their lives again. In fact, most of the leading voices directly and blatantly blamed the Israelites, making the argument that it was their own disobedience that had caused their exile. So many of them had accepted that their devastation was from their falling short to full faithfulness in God. And while I can wholeheartedly say that that is not the way of the God of love, doing harms to human for being human, I also do understand what it's like to be in the clutch of oppression and to ingest the lie that it is my fault. Maybe in looking back over your own experiences, you can connect to some of those feelings too. I imagine being among the exiles, I would be questioning God. I would be questioning my identity. I would be questioning if I would ever find and know a place that would feel again like home. It must have felt so incredibly scary to be in that kind of wilderness. Of course, this existential and material crisis is not one reserved to folks living centuries ago in another time. We know that. Reading this scripture now begs that we bring to mind and heart those persons today who are living in exile, and not a metaphorical one. They are literally unmoored from home and unsure of just about everything. More people today than ever before in history live outside of their birth countries. There are 7.8 billion international migrants at the moment. And that number obviously has increased recently as persons flee Ukraine from the Russian invasion. If we just focus on that one conflict, we confront the fact, and we try and hold the fact, that 10 million people have fled their homes in Ukraine. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 4 million have left their home for neighboring countries. Another estimated 6.5 million people are thought to be displaced, but inside the war-torn country itself. All of those lives and families, all that loss. For any and for all who navigate exile, who long for asylum, for safety, it is terribly, in fact, dangerously easy to be convinced by catastrophe that God is absent and that they will never be at home again. Those in the 6th century BCE probably felt pretty similar. From that spiritual, from that physical experience of dislocation, Isaiah proclaims salvation to the people of God, a way, a deliverer, a new home found in freedom. Isaiah's spiritual audacity astounds and it shocks when you do keep it in its original context. We get a lot from this prophecy here. His prophecy offers the Israelites and us two truths to help us navigate wilderness as we do make our way towards freedom, towards a new home. First, remember. Isaiah guides those in exiles to recall God's faithfulness in the past, when you can't find God right in front of you, when you can't remember who or even whose you are, when you can't locate a way out or beyond where you are. Remember what God has done. Remember that God is the God who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings out chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down. They cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Isaiah reaches back and holds up for the Israelites that foundational story of God's deliverance, the exodus from Egypt, to force it from memory and to use the truth of it for the present. Remember, folks, Isaiah says, God has already made a way through water, through wilderness, and recalling where God has shown up before, when then, too, you might have been convinced of God's absence and of the finality of oppression. That can course correct our faith in God in this moment. It is odd what follows, though, this beautiful and brilliant point that Isaiah makes. There's this strange verse that comes after as a pivot. You might have caught it when Kay was reading. God says to the beloved, "Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old." It is a head scratcher because it immediately follows this sacred remembrance. But I think the quick shift gives us some indication of meaning. It's as if the Israelites, we, are being instructed, remember, but don't dwell. Look back, but don't settle there. God was faithful and is faithful too. How can that remembrance inform where we go next? Here we come to the second truth offered as we wander this wilderness of separation from what once felt like home, no matter what the cause of dislocation. Isaiah is emphatic. God is still working, still active, still creative, still bringing about that which, we just can't even imagine yet. God declares, "I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way." The time of miracles, Isaiah is telling us, it is not in the past. Isaiah insists over and over in that beautiful present tense. God makes a way, brings us out, gives us water, and is doing this new thing. Now, this is no absent God. No God in the past, but a God abiding in the moment and forging a way for the future. It'll be a different way. What's even more comforting to me than reconnecting to this truth is where that freedom way is being brought about. The birthplace of God's new thing is in the thick of the wilderness, far and away from the clutch of empire, also far and away from the places we hold of comfortable constraint. This new way, Isaiah tells us, it's born wild. The river will be in the desert. The water is in the wilderness. The natural world, the creation of God, will revive us and give us the resources to manifest a new home. The Creator God is still creating. We, all of us, from time to time, we experience one form or another of exile, wandering the wilderness not of our own choosing. We might have been thrust from or thrown out of our physical homes. We might have lost the home that we found in an intimate and important relationship with a mother, a partner, a brother, or a friend. We might have lost the security, the provision that we knew and that we counted on from dependable employment. We might have lost being at home in our bodies and experience a separation from our health or our former ability. We might be watching someone we care for be evicted from their health, from their sense of self. Sometimes, for whatever reason, we experience with intensity a profound longing for something, for anything to transport us from where we are and get us free. We can feel so far away from home when we're in that kind of wilderness. A couple of months ago, listening to On Being, one of my favorite podcasts, I was introduced to the visionary pragmatist, Colette Pichon Battle, who is co-executive director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. She founded the center in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Her work through the center influences realms from equitable disaster recovery to global migration, from community economic development to climate justice and energy democracy. She's a generational native of New Orleans, and she traces her entry into the work of climate activism through a confrontation with the reality of her and her people's impending exile from home. In an interview, she cites a professor who puts all of these maps of the Gulf Coast on a wall for this local New Orleans University student grouping, and then portrays a time lapse of projected land loss with rising sea levels as a result of climate change. All the students are asked to put their fingers on the maps of where home is. And then the time lapse plays, and they watch as each and every one of those points disappears. And they were told, this is gonna happen no matter what. Battle said of her experience, I couldn't believe what I saw, this place that I hold so dear, that I had such a long memory of. All those stories are going to go. All the trees that we sat under are going to go. Everything that I knew to be, like who I was, even describing just who I am and where I come from, it was gonna go. And that land, she said, for Creole people like me, it's tied to our freedom. This phenomenal woman, though, said her name was in battle for no reason. So she and others are developing with the center a new type of intervention and response to climate disaster and its interlocking and consequential problems. This new way, it prioritizes those most affected and vulnerable to climate crisis, the poor and the disenfranchised. This is a major shift because our federal aid and response intentionally and only seeks to preserve the middle class tax base. The center keeps combined in its work and all of its policy proposals the knowledge and expertise of local and impacted communities, then with legal experts, spiritual tradition of place and people, community storytellers, and the arts. Imagine, it's a revelatory response that grounds itself in the home that was and casts itself into a future that might be. And it gives me hope. It gives me hope. I see the prophetic imagination of Isaiah and Colette Battle's visionary climate work and others like her, informed and inspired by the experience of exilic wilderness. Folks are doing new things, bringing about a new way. So we can't go back to what was, but we can try to do something in the future that gets us all a little more free. Tell the stories, hold on to the truths, and use them to build a home for us all. God has delivered us before. God will deliver us again. And God's new thing, this I love, God's new thing, our home in freedom, doesn't get lost in the wilderness, my friends. It's born there. We who long for freedom, come.